Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of Open Book Entrepreneur. I'm really thrilled and happy that we have Coach Anna here with us today. Hi, Anna. So she will introduce herself in a moment, but just for the audience, I can share she's like a multiple entrepreneur, builds so many different businesses, and also, has an amazing story. She's really informed about neuroscience, and yeah. So Anna, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me on your show, Tony. I'm very excited to be here, so thank you. And thank you to anyone out there who's listening. I appreciate your time. So my name is Coach Anna Lang, and if you think of those people who you hear about and they have their lives together and they know what they're doing, that's not me, or that wasn't me. In fact, I was the opposite, and I was so good at it. I spent pretty much 37 years of my life. I can pinpoint it to that number. I spent about 37 years of my life pretending to be somebody I wasn't and basically spiraling my life into a small hole that I didn't actually believe I could ever get out of. And I'll back that up a little bit to share that when I was young, when I was very little, I somewhere along the way got the idea that I wasn't right, that there was something wrong with me. And whatever room I showed up in, I was either too loud or too much or too uh, this or too that. I would be one thing over here and it wouldn't work, but it would sort of work over there. Anyways, I did what kids do when they feel they're broken. I became sort of this master morpher because kids are really resilient and they're really cool that way. They figure out what their environment needs and then they become that thing because that's how they get their needs met. So that's what I did. And I bent over backwards and kind of twisted myself into knots. And I thought, okay, if I could just figure out the right version of me to be, then everything will work out. But of course, that's not the case because when you are not who you are, you're not very good at being somebody else. It's just you, you're not going to get there. And so that's what happened to me. And long story short, there was a suicide attempt in there. I ran away from home. I tanked relationships. Eventually, I found somebody to get married to and thought that the marriage would be the answer, that somebody approving of me would then give me that validation I needed to, I don't know, feel like I was making the benchmark, whatever that invisible benchmark was. But you're married, right, Tony?
Yes, I am.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, anyone who's ever been married knows it's a maximizer, not a minimizer. So that blew up. I started a business and then I started another business and I would build these businesses. I've had 8 businesses, Tony. I would build these businesses and one, I'd bend over backwards to attract clients that actually didn't want to work with me and that I didn't want to work with. And I'd build these businesses that felt like they were better suited for somebody else because they were, because I wasn't being me when I made them. So business after business that I hated, I called them beautiful prisons. And then eventually, as it does when you're living as in this sort of constant state of who am I supposed to be? And you're looking for the world to tell you. I ended up homeless. I ended up living out of an old warehouse because I walked out of a 16-year relationship with only the clothes on my back because I had this. I thought it was my big wake up moment. It was part of my wake up moment. I had the moment where I was like, if I stay here and I continue doing what I'm doing, I'm not, that first suicide attempt that didn't work, the next one is. And that wasn't what I wanted. So I ended up leaving. I gave up everything. I gave up all my money. I gave up all my security. I just walked out. I started living illegally out of this warehouse. And I smile about it now because I'm in a much better place now. So I can look at this and go, this was my awakening. This was Anna coming out. This is but it wasn't a great scenario because the relationship you have with yourself, that's what you bring forward in your business. That's what you bring forward in your life. That's what impacts how I talk to myself is how I talk to everyone around me. How I run my life is how I run my businesses. And so um, I hit this homelessness spot and I would get up at 4 or 5 in the morning. I would go to this old place that I used to live where my ex was because I had kids and I didn't want them to know that I had left. And I would be there when they woke up and I would get them ready for the bus and I get them on the bus. And then I would go back to this old crap warehouse. It had no sink, it had no kitchen. I would work all day. I would go back to meet them off the bus. I'd, do the stuff at home, pretend like life was normal. Once they were asleep, I'd go back. I'd get 2 or 3 hours of sleep. And then I'd repeat. I did this for like 8 months and nobody knew. My mom didn't know, my parents, my family, my friends, not a single person knew. And I'll tell you why. Because remember, I talk about the relationship you had with yourself? There was me, actual me inside me, the tanking me, the terrified me, and then there was the external me, the on paper me, the one with businesses, the one that was successful, the one that had the perfect marriage, the one that, and they were very different people. And I didn't want anyone to see this one because I thought, and you'll relate to this as a business owner, you are your business. If and I had this, or so I believed. So I thought if my clients saw what a mess I was, they wouldn't trust me. They wouldn't want to buy from me. They wouldn't want, and my business was hanging on by this like just the thinnest of threads. I couldn't afford to eat. I could barely afford to keep myself afloat. And I thought if they found out, oh God, I'm gonna lose everything. Like I already don't have everything, but I'll lose the little bit that I have. And then what do I do? Then I'm actually like full on out. And how do you recover from that? So I had this crazy schedule and it came to a head at Christmas that year. My brother called me and he's like, well, he didn't call me, he texted me, but I'll use this because it's fun. I'm so excited to be spending the holidays. I can't wait to come out and see you because my brother lived in BC at the time. He's like, I can't wait to spend the holiday with you and my ex. And I was like, come again? And apparently my ex had invited my brother, my entire family. He had made this great big Christmas party at the house I wasn't living in that nobody knew I wasn't living in and that they didn't even know we were separated. Like nobody knew. But he had made this giant Christmas party for us. And that year, I got to sit surrounded by all of these people who had no idea who I was, and it finally sunk in. Walking away isn't enough. Walking away is nothing if I don't back it up with the actions and the internal work that will support the change that I say I want, right? These big dramatic things that we do, we make a big change in our business. We will, take this dramatic action to create the family we want, but it's a single action that we think will change everything. And that's not how it works. And so I got to get really real with myself. And I realized in that moment that if I wanted my life to be what I wanted it to be, and I wanted to have a business, which as an entrepreneur, if you want to have a business, it's part of who you are. It's not like you can walk away and be happy. If you want a business, you're going to build that. But if I wanted it to be what I wanted it to be, I had to be brave enough to start being myself in it and in all instances around it. And so that's what I did. That's when we were talking briefly before we got on here. That's when I started to really dial things up. I didn't tank Christmas. I didn't do a big thing where I stood on a table and embarrassed everybody. And that's not my mode operandi. What I did was I waited till after that Christmas. I said, I made this mess. I'm going to sit in this mess. Nobody made it but me. Nobody's evil for doing these things because I didn't give whatever messages. I wasn't being myself, so I didn't actually communicate properly. I waited till after that. I let everybody know. I'm like, I'm divorced. My life is falling apart. Ta-da! I dismantled the business that I was currently in. I completely dismantled it. And then I took that long road back and I said, this time I'm going to do some work, some real work, some me work. And I started learning neuroscience, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychology. I took every course I could find that was cheap or free because at the time I had no money. Like I was still homeless during this. It didn't erase my homelessness. It wasn't like somebody stood up and said, "Oh, Anna, you've screwed up your life. I'm going to save you." Like nobody came to rescue me. P.S. Anyone who's watching, people don't rescue you. That's up to you, not the world around you. So if you're waiting for that to rescue your business, to rescue your life, you stop. But anyways, and while I was learning and while I was growing, while I was doing these things, I started learning a lot of interesting stuff. And one was which there's this layer under everything that I was doing. I call it now the 6 keys, but it's a foundation underneath you. And if you don't dial in this foundation, it doesn't matter how many courses you take, how many books you read, how much knowledge you have, how good you are, how smart you are, how anything you are, everything you do is going to fall in those cracks. You will see people doing exactly the same steps, taking exactly the same, workshops, and they're going to fly past you. So I dialed that in, and then people started saying, "Oh, what are you doing?" And and share this with me. And that grew into, I think I have 6 or 7 of the programs behind me. I have 11 now. I have a book, and I have a coaching business and a group program, and it turned into a business I love and a life that I love. And I now have relationships that are real. And my kids talk to me not because they're in a way that they're afraid I'm going to break down or be like lose my crap on them. They can be real with me, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. I mean, thank you so much for sharing this story and to opening up, and then for anyone out there who is actually, stuck either in their business or in themselves or in any other way, like, what's one of the main tips you can give them?
The biggest tip, and I'll leave this. Remember I talked about that foundation? If you're stuck, you have a filter in play. And I'll explain what filters are. Filters are how you see the world. So I'll use this guy. Everybody pops out of the world from a specific spot. And in this spot, there's a specific education system. There's codes of conduct. There's rules about what's lazy or what's not lazy, what's considered a good kid or a really great student, or what your political systems are and your religious systems are. And that's what's around you. And that's what shapes how you see the world. And you'll grow from there and you'll branch all kinds of ideas and beliefs. And that's called context. And a lot of us don't question our context. We just know it to be true. And when you're stuck, it's because you're looking through these filters and you believe they're true. And you believe that this is the only way forward. But because of your filter, there's something either missing in you or missing in the world around you that prevents you from moving forward. And the way to get unstuck is to change the perception or these filters, to challenge these filters and adjust them so that you can open up your perspective enough to see other possibilities. And that's how you get unstuck.
And how can someone actually, change the perspective about the filters?
Well, there's a number of ways you change your filters. And none of them, they're all simple, but none of them are easy. So, for example, the first thing you've got to do is recognize that you're using a filter, because that's the other thing. When we look at personal development, I'm going to dial it back a little bit. When we're talking about personal development, we want to look at building our personal development, our awareness, like building muscles. I can say I want to challenge a filter, but if the filter, you think of it like a muscle, I've been using it since I was 4 or 3 or 7 years old, and I'm now just about 50. It's like, I'm going to use this guy. He's my strong muscle. He's a pretty big muscle, okay? And I want you to consider that your new learning, when you're going to challenge the filter, it's like throwing a baby in a boxing ring with a world heavyweight champion. So when I'm giving you all this information, I'd like you to have that context in your head so that you can sort of see why it sounds simple, but it's really not simple. So the first step is to get familiar with who's running the show, who's talking, who's showing up. And filters show up in so many ways. Your internal dialogue. Have you ever had negative self-talk?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, many times. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I sort of started the self-development process and learning, and why I did all these different courses. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
tell me more, please.
No, that's perfect. But if you have negative self-talk, that's a filter. That's a layer that you're using. And I'll give you an example. So there's a judgment in negative self-talk, a judgment of what should be different, what you should be able to do, the distance between where you are and what's supposed to be happening. That's where negative self-talk lives. And that's a filter because who says you should be somewhere else? According to who? Like I'm an idiot. I showed up so poorly. These people are. Future casting, predicting the future. That's another filter. It's assuming that we know how people are going to respond or what they're going to say or how they're going to feel. Unless you're a really good psychic, and even really good psychics make mistakes, right? You're not going to know. It's but it's a filter. Propriety, or what's I talked about this earlier. What is good manners? What is right? So we want to become familiar. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of filters. So when you're stuck and when you want to move, you want to start to recognize your language first, because that's where your filters are hiding. What am I saying to myself internally? What am I assuming to be true? Where am I saying this is right, wrong, good, or bad? Those are other filters. There isn't anything, nothing is right, wrong, good, or bad. Nothing is polar. Everything either works in a certain context or it doesn't work. But it's not bad. It's simply out of context if it's not working, right? Those types of shifts, or those types of awarenesses, become aware. And then once you're aware of the language you're using, and you're good enough to, catch it, even on the rebound, even later when you're beating yourself up over coffee, you're like, oh, wait, negative self-talk, filter, cool. Now what? Right? Now what? So what? Now what? Once you catch it, the second thing is to say, okay, cool. Where does this actually come from? Where did I learn this rule? Because that's something we don't often think about. We just beat ourselves up because we're dumb and not enough and stupid and we should have done this or we should have done that, but we don't actually think about where that rule came from. Who made that rule? Do we even agree with that rule? And why do we agree with that rule? Likely it has something to do with your safety in your childhood. There was somebody who taught you that rule and you adapted as a kid. Like in my story, we adapt because we're really good. And so we made up these rules so that we would get our needs met, we would get the love or the food or the whatever that we needed to move forward. But those rules, they're still with you as an adult. So where did it come from? Do you agree with this rule? Does this rule still support you in a healthy way? Does it benefit your life? Get curious about it. Don't beat yourself up for having it. Understand it. There's information there, and it's probably, by the way, if it's in one place in your life, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So you notice it, you get curious about it, and then you say, okay, well, what if I let it go? That's if you really are proficient and it's not a really big deal and it's not the strongest muscle in the room, you might be able to let it go. But chances are, if it's really strong, it pops out of you without your knowledge. It's become a habit. Rules become habits, and emotions become habits, which is really interesting. So it's going to pop out of you often because you're used to it. So then what you want to do, you're not just going to be able to get rid of it or release it, anti-popular belief. So what you do is you say, okay, well, what's one small step? What's one small thing I can either say, do, or take action on when I catch it? So I catch this negative self-talk. What's one thing? I got curious about it. It happened because my dad used to tell me that if I didn't get good grades, I was going to be a loser in life. So every time I'm not the best person in the room, I feel like a loser. Okay, well, next time I say to myself, oh, you're a loser, I'm simply going to challenge the question because I know it's not going to get released in one go. So I'll say, okay, well, says who? Who says? Like I'm gonna question the question or question the statement. And that's how you work through being stuck. Is you're like, okay, says who? What if I didn't believe this? What would be possible for me? What if this wasn't true? What would be possible for me? What else is there out there? And you start doing this and you start building this muscle until they're balanced. Because the one thing I want to also state is you're not looking to get rid of it. That self-reflection, that, oh my gosh, I'm showing up like an idiot, that's actually powerful and necessary for you to grow as a human being and be able to work in society without being a jerk, okay? Without completely alienating the people around you. But when it's too strong, it stops your life. So what you want to do is you want to build up both sides of that equation so you can both be really compassionate with yourself and also be honestly self-reflective without falling into a spiral, right? So you want both of your pipes out. I just like flexing on camera. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, totally, totally. And then just one more question, before we sort of like, before we go. So Like, what are the usual best results people are getting when they sign up to your programs or when they read your book?
Oh, well, my book is in publishing, so it's not
Mhm.
out, or in publishing, in editing, so it's not out yet. But there's books that go with all my programs, though.
Mhm.
I have seen some phenomenal results. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of them, a woman came into my program. Now, I tend to attract people who come from, it's not a monetary thing. I have multimillionaires in my programs. I also have people who are unemployed in my programs. But I had one woman, and she came in, and she was an agoraphobic, so she couldn't leave her house. She would have panic attacks. She could not be in public. She couldn't talk to other people. She was even sort of antsy around her family, but she could make it through. She was unable to do social situations. She could not, she was telling me she couldn't go to her MRI appointment, kind of a big deal, because she was overrun with panic at the idea of being in a room with strangers, of being in that machine. She couldn't do it. So her health was actually in jeopardy. She would go to, get herself out of the house to do something as simple as return something to, say, a Walmart. But if she could get herself through the door, she couldn't make it through the line because as she was going through the lineup, there was this narrative of who am I to waste these people's time? Like we got this thing, we did this, this is on us. Like we shouldn't be returning, like all this stuff in her head. She came into my program. 3 weeks in, she went to her MRI. She talked herself off the ledge when she started to have a panic attack, and she went home again within 3 weeks of starting my program. She went to return something to Walmart, made it through the lineup, stood there without having a breakdown, returned the thing. She went to a social gathering with her family, which she previously hadn't been able to do. That's the type of results I'm talking about. I had one girl who told me that the week she joined my program, she was planning on committing suicide. And then she got in the room with us and she's like, well, maybe I'll wait a day and then another day and another day. And then 3 months later, she told me, she's like, yeah, I was that close when I met you. So I'm not saying those are results that everybody's going to have. I'm not saying those are things that I had a girl, I have a couple actually. I now have two people who are recovering from human trafficking. They're in my program. And not only are they moving forward powerfully, I mean, they're powerful. These are all incredibly powerful people too. But the program is supporting them to see that they are not who their past was and that these are the skills in order to create something new. Like they've now gotten out of the human trafficking thing, but there's not a lot of support for those people. So I've all walks of life, all walks of life. I have one woman who just bought, I mean, last year she bought properties in Portugal and Spain, and now she's buying properties in Italy, and she's in my program because there's residual stuff that's holding her back in relationship areas of her life. So broad spectrum, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then on top of that, like if someone wants to actually get in touch with you, if they want to find out a little bit more about you, your courses, your future book and everything, how they can do that?
Um, Go to my website, www.annalang.ca. And if anything I'm saying resonates with you, or you're thinking, oh my God, I need this stuff, join my hub. I have, it's called the Permission to Shift Hub, and it's a group program, and it's $20 a month and you will sit with me every week. I sit down with that group every week for an hour. We sit down and we go through, we just did filters this week, actually. We talked about filters, and it's a completely safe space. And the whole purpose isn't for anyone to judge anyone else. It's simply I go in there and I'm like, hey, let's think about this. What comes up for you? What do you think about this? And then we have weekly prompts. I make fun little downloads and meditations and books, and I'm always giving them stuff. You're my test subjects if you're in that group. I'm testing all my new material on you. I'm like, what flies, what doesn't fly? This thing helpful? How do we be authentic? What works? How do we make our lives amazing? What do you need? It's a wonderful group. I highly recommend it to anybody.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for that. I will share the link in the description of this video and wherever we post the podcast. So thank you so much, Anna, for being a guest here today. Thank you all for listening and watching to this episode, and see you in the next episode. Bye bye.